Okay, I think we can start. Hello, everybody. There may be some people that come in, but we can let them in as we go. Welcome. My name's Mark Dean. I'm one of the two co-hosts of this event, along with my colleague Nina Danino, who will introduce herself in a moment. I'm an artist. I'm a chaplain at University Arts London, and I coordinate arts chaplaincy projects. Welcome back. If you were at the first session, it's lovely to see so many of you that have come back, and I know there's some new members of this forum as well. Welcome to you all. Those of you who were here in the first session will notice a few little differences this time. We asked you for feedback at the end of the last session, and the fact that so many of you are here and have signed up is a sign, I hope, that we must have got something right. But there was a general sense that there wasn't enough time for discussion. So you'll also notice that we have 4 presenters this evening rather than 3. That might seem a bit counterintuitive if we're trying to leave more time for discussion, but the way we're going to do it is that after each presentation, which will be a maximum of 20 minutes, and all of the presenters have kindly agreed to be kept to time. After each presentation, we will invite comments and questions in the chat, which I'll read out, but the presenters will respond to them kind of collectively at the end. So we'll have a general discussion at the end, which hopefully will be a bit more conducive to the open exchange that we're hoping to engender in this forum. So I hope that makes sense. I'd also, another difference is that we have James Tabush, who is waving his hand there. James is a multidisciplinary artist and a junior fellow on the MA Fine Art program at Goldsmiths, and he is our host actually for this evening, our Zoom host. So if you have any issues with Zoom, you can message James directly. Actually, he's not called James, he's called Art and Religion in the list of participants, Art and Religion. So you can message him and he will hopefully be able to help you. And he may also message you if he notices any issues. So please feel free and to contact James. So I think that's everything. So I just quickly like to hand over now to Nina to introduce herself, and then we will proceed. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Mark. I was just sending the link to Lucy Newman, Cleve, who just got in touch. Well, welcome everybody. Very nice to have some of you back and new people who are attending. Just to welcome you, hope you enjoy it. Mark will be leading it, and I'll join in towards the end in the discussion if things work out like that. And I'm looking forward very much to the presentations today, and I hope you enjoy them.
Thank you, Nina. Yes, I should have mentioned that another difference from last time is that Nina and I decided to kind of alternate hosting just to keep things a bit briefer as well. So next time Nina will be kind of doing what I'm doing today. Lovely. Okay, so I am now going to introduce Alastair Gordon. Ali is a painter. He runs the graduate program at Leith School of Art. He is a co-founder of Morphē Arts, which actually another of our presenters, Sarah, is also involved with. So we may hear a little bit about that. And also you can always ask questions in the chat if you're interested in that, because they've been doing that for some time. So over to you, Ali. Thank you very much. And I'll give you a little heads up at 15 minutes as agreed. Okay, thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Nina, very much. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. And I see a few familiar faces and names around here, which is lovely. What I'm proposing to do is to share not so much recent painting, but more a working method that has changed, evolved in the last year or so. I see there are a few folks here who are part of the Morphē group, and you may have heard a version of this at one of our events a while back, but hopefully there's enough new material in here to keep things interesting. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. To me, painting is much like speaking in tongues, that ancient language between God and humanity, where the Spirit of God takes over and new sounds emerge like a groundswell of water. This creative soil is full of life. In moments, I understand what's happening, but at other times, the full interpretation doesn't come until later, if at all. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. It's in these moments of creative flow I sense the Spirit at work, where God sends the rain and the painter works the ground, where structure and play find their communion, where heaven touches earth on the surface of a canvas, and the Spirit of God dances with pigment on the end of a brush. The process of painting is truly humbling, humiliating, energizing, and exhausting. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in ceaseless praise. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. There are moments in painting that feel enigmatic, like the Spirit hovering above the waters or the wind through the trees. Yet there are also moments when the Spirit rushes in like a sword with great urgency and clarity, like the prophet Agabus, who took Paul's belt and tied it round his wrists, a form of performance art to warn Paul of the dangers ahead. Or the prophet Ezekiel, who lay on his side for 390 days as a sign to God's people, they must turn and repent. Such works of the Spirit may have been spontaneous, but they were hardly obscure. A tangible voice from God that left no doubt in the prophet's mind as to what was being said. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. To me, art matters because the Spirit of God can speak through it in ways both tangible and intuitive. Rational thought meets instinct or intuition or something like that. I love that thing that the writer Jamie K.A. Smith said recently about the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty about attunement. That space that exists between instinct and intellect. To me, that space doesn't just exist in the mind, it exists in the body, in my body. It evokes through the daily liturgies of prayer, drawing, and painting, bound in the ligaments as I take a morning run, when I come to the studio, as I sip coffee, as I light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. The daily rhythms etched into the body like liturgy, habit, or maybe just an addiction. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of thy love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. In a recent symposium, Urella Andrews, who's here, described phenomenology as a branch of philosophy that approaches lived experience. That meaning, there are many ways we can increase our capacity for attunement. These daily liturgical rhythms, these dances in the studio, this attentiveness to the world, rather than a hostile or coercive activity of art making, to seek a hospitable approach to one's art practice, something that allows for human flourishing. Father, what does that mean? How can I do it? Please help me, I humbly pray. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Is it true that Paul Cézanne painted apples 75 times? The mountain, Mont Saint-Victoire, 120 times. Why would he do that? Did the apples become a liturgy for him? Did he bind them within his body through the visceral actions of pigment, oil, and brush? Edward Collier painted the same newspaper article over 75 times. He was the first quodlibet painter. This thing, quodlibet painting, a collage of ideas and matter. This thing I've been obsessed with the last couple of years. This thing. Is there more to be said about it, or are we done? Quodlibet painting first emerged as a form of illusionistic painting in Northern Europe in the 17th century. From the Latin, then to the French, quodlibet, meaning what you will. It was a term borrowed from a musical tradition, not unlike a form of jazz, where a group of musicians would sit around a table and throw down different lines of melody as a kind of musical collage. You couldn't overthink it. You just had to sort of feel your way through it. Random patterns would emerge, and within them, a sense of their own rhythm, a pulse, which became a repeated refrain. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. This thing, quodlibet painting, this thing I've been obsessed with all these years, this thing, is there yet merit in repetition, or is there more yet to be said? Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. This thing, this thing, this thing, this form of liturgy, this thing, this form of personal painterly liturgy, this thing that binds the ideas in a material sense in my own ligaments. This thing that binds the rhythm. This thing. 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 This rhythm. This rhythm. This liturgy. This liturgy. This love. This love. This habit. This habit. Light the candle. Say the prayer. Open the sketchbook. Light the candle. Say the prayer. Open the sketchbook. Light the candle. Say the prayer. Open the sketchbook. Light the candle. Say the prayer. Open the sketchbook. Light the candle. Say the prayer. Open the sketchbook. Light the candle. Say the prayer. Open the sketchbook. Light the candle. Say the prayer. Open the sketchbook. Light the candle. Say the prayer. Open the sketchbook. Light the candle. say the prayer, open the sketchbook, light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook, light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Most mornings, the day begins with a prayer. I come to the studio, light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. I recognize that making is a form of prayer, and I tend to think best, maybe pray best, through the process of making. It might be something like this. Heavenly Father, I give you this day. Give me the courage to make something new. Help me to manage the resources of time and energy and sight. Show me what needs to be done. Diminish my ego. Amen. A great work of art can ask a question, probe a statement, and get under the skin of what's really going on. In this way, art might serve a prophetic function, or at the very least, uncover hidden truths. Art matters because it can serve as accounting of our time, a record of historical events, a monument to those who lived through it and died because of it, a telling, a wake-up call, a standing stone. I come again to the landscape because I want to remember how to feel a sense of rhythm, a rhythm of stone, of wood, of salt, of water and plastic, a poiesis of detritus and matter etched in memory and water. Cézanne encouraged us not to make a copy of nature, but to recognize our sensibilities towards it. Yet my sensibilities are attuned to someone who lives in a city. How then to respond to that wonder of the landscape as one who normally sees it through the mediated lens of a screen, a phone, or a book? How also to see the landscape through the eyes of a 21st century painter? One feels the weight of art history on one's shoulder and that cynical gaze of my peers. I'm not just a cognitive machine. I'm a maker. I think through making. Ideas embodied in pigment, oil, and flesh. A sort of muscle memory or embodied creative flow. Take my silver and my gold, not a mite would I withhold. Take my intellect and use every power as thou wilt choose. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Where does one imagine? I don't just imagine with my mind. I imagine with my heart. I imagine from the tip of the brush. I imagine in the coarse veins of charcoal on paper as the graphite snaps under the weight of my over-eager hand. A liturgy nurtured through making. I bind those rhythms of drawing into the body, a muscle memory, a creative flow.
Ali, sorry to interrupt your flow, but that's just your little 15-minute reminder there. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Thank you.
We'll get smoother at this.
I always paint best when the day is nearly done. when the rhythms are so practiced in my body that they become intuitive. In this way, painting becomes like a prayer in itself. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. So Lily walks into the studio. She says, "My hair looked like drips." And she poses for the camera and another one for Instagram. And maybe her hair does look like drips. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. Light the candle, say the prayer, open the sketchbook. I think I've managed it just about in time, did I, Mark?
That was wonderful. Yes, wonderfully in time, and a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And apologies for interrupting. We'll get a smoother system, but that was great. Thank you so much. Now, a few people have come in since I gave our little introduction. Just to recap, we have 4 presenters today, and rather than taking a Q&A in between each one, we're saving it up to the end. But I invite you now to put into the chat any comments or questions you'd like to address to Ali or around his presentation. And then he will be able to respond as he chooses later on. So please do type in now. And just, I'll read a few out as they come in. What a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much, Alastair. I'll echo that. While people are thinking, actually, I'm just going to take the opportunity, I suppose, of being in this position to ask you a question now. I'll cheat and ask you a question now, Ali. You used the phrase "bound in the ligaments" at least once, and riffed around it, I think, a bit more. And of course, the root of the word religion is religare or religare, depending how you pronounce your Latin. And it occurred to me the first time, it never occurred to me before, but maybe the root of the word ligament is linked to that. So, and my question really is the tape, the trompe l'oeil tape that you use, which I find very interesting. And particularly lately, I've seen on your Instagram, you've been doing a trompe l'oeil kind of taped border and then going out and painting kind of en plein air. So there's this kind of reality and illusion, although of course all painting is illusion. But I just wondered whether there's a link between the tape, the binding tape, and this notion of the bound in the ligaments and religion. Yeah, so that's my question. A question here. Let me see. So beautiful as ever, Ali. That was wonderful. That was from Urella. Anna's iPhone to everyone. That was wonderful. Thank you. David Vanacore, amazing. Thank you a lot. Erica Winstone, have you always worked in this way, involving your spiritual practice? If it was not always the case, how did it change the work, if it did? You'll be, of course, the chat will remain here, so you'll be able to refer to it later. And if people think of a question later on, please feel free to just add it at any point. But perhaps if you wanted to address it to someone in particular, do put their name. Just say question for Ali or Becky, etc. Becky has given a definition of religion, Middle English, originally in the sense life under monastic vows, from Old French or from Latin religio, obligation, bond, reverence. perhaps based on Latin religare, to bind. Yes, so perhaps, there we are, perhaps. Thanks for that expansion and correction, Becky. Everything's perhaps, isn't it? Everything's perhaps. Lovely. So thank you so much, Ali. As I say, please feel free to put more questions in if they come, but now I would like to hand over. You'll have noticed, I think, that we're going in alphabetical order of first names. That's the way we're doing it today. And so next up is Becky Beasley. Becky is a visual artist based in Hastings. She's also a senior lecturer on the BA Fine Art program at Goldsmiths. So over to you, Becky. Thank you.
Becky, you're muted at the moment.
Oh yes, thank you. Forgot about that. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. How's that? Yeah.
That looks good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just move you over to that side. Okay. So I'm going to speak today about the kind of genesis and sort of process of the video work that I proposed for this forum, Man Restored Broken Work. The Vimeo is open, it's available, there's no password needed at the moment, so I think that link was given out, but I'll give it during the talk. The film is about 21 minutes long, so that will be available kind of ongoing after the session to watch. Oh, why can't I can't use my, sorry, tech. Hang on. Oh, that's it. I was pressing the wrong button. Okay, so that's the sort of information. 21 minutes and 54 seconds. It's a silent work that I made in 2015 when my son was about 6 months old, anecdotally, and the hands you'll see in the sort of images of the film are actually my partner's hands. So there's a still, just showing a few stills as I go through today from the film. I think this was my kind of text that I used for the introduction. So sorry, it's because I can't really see everybody. It's I get slightly distracted by myself. I've always worked. Sorry, I'm doing it again. Come on, Becky. There you go. So I've always worked very much alone. The more alone, the better. The deeper the solitude, the better my focus. Like a desert brother is how I always saw myself in my studio, outside of the world in many ways, hermetic. Turns out in the last few months I've discovered I'm actually autistic. So these kind of conditions suited me, and this is a work that I made in I think about 2007 or 8. Wooden, it was one of the first kind of sculptures that I made. These wooden boxes. This piece is actually made from acacia, and I sourced the wood from a small kind of chunky bookshelf I found on eBay, and that wood was then planed down and cut up to make a small set of these woodworks. So the joiner I worked with, he was a kind of fine cabinet maker, was very distressed when I said that the finish I wanted was this kind of plain, bare, the saw marks are still kind of in the wood, and that the only kind of surface I was ever going to use on them would be some natural beeswax. His desire was clearly to bring up the kind of finish and surface and polish on the wood to a really kind of glossy kind of very different degree, and it was the plainness and the bareness of the wood that was interesting and important to me, and also that it's the sections are 3 mil thick, so I kind of imagined it and invented it as something that was almost as if I was kind of making something out of cardboard myself, and so he was kind of grumpy about that as well, that it didn't have good sort of joins, it was all kind of glued together, and then I inserted into the base of the 2 sections of what was originally what I thought was what I called a 1 shoebox, which I found, I think, in Soho when I was much younger than I am now. It was kind of sort of narrower than an ordinary shoebox, and I found it kind of interesting, so I kept it. So each of the sections of what is the kind of the box and then the lid have these black glass panels inserted into them. So that was a work that I made a long time ago. A couple of years later, the work had been on show in Portugal, and I received these rather sad little snapshots from the gallery I used to work with, letting me know that it had been damaged in transit. And my first instinct for these photos was, I think, just one of great empathy. I remember thinking it was like some kind of little Bambi, and these snapshots that that Zane, the gallery assistant at the time, took and sent to me, I found really fascinating. And I made the decision at that point that one day the process of repairing it was going to be something I was going to work with in some way. And so I carefully packed it away, broken. I mentioned in the earlier notes, sorry, this is the first time I've spoken like this about this work and in this context, which has been rather emotional for me. I grew up Catholic and went out into a very silent place around 14 when I refused to go to mass anymore with my dear mum, who's here tonight, I believe. And yeah, it was a very, very long journey that I'd been on. And so this is the first time really in my adult life I've talked about my practice in the context of my own faith with my peers. So thank you for this, Nina. It actually feels very strange. I feel very liberated. I also feel like, yeah, you've unlocked a kind of space and access for me to talk. I'm sure this has a lot to do with COVID and care and time, perhaps. So I'll kind of go back to these, but I'd made a series of photographs in the time since I met my partner, Steve. So on the left is cucumber hand, and on the right, walnut hand. So I'll come back to those in the context of Robert Bresson in a second. Oh, immediately, okay. I'm going with the order of my slides now. So these are some stills from Robert Bresson's masterpiece, to my mind, A Man Escaped. I'm using the slightly shortened version. A Condemned Man Escaped. There is an additional title that I can't quite remember now, but I'll get back to it. So I just thought I'd include some of these stills. So the film is one of much silence in terms of voice, and process in terms of manual labour, making the process of creating an escape from a prisoner of war. He was a prisoner, imprisoned in a German prison during the war. So these are some more stills. Sorry, I'm kind of assuming there's some awareness around Breton's film now, because my talk is slightly jumping to some assumptions. So these are some of the amazing stills of the process of using what I think might have been a spoon to produce this kind of knife to create, to break the panels out of the door without being seen. And so an amazing film in terms of watching the hands of the protagonist producing his escape tools, really. So I'll go back to that in a moment. A few years later, I took out my small broken woodwork pieces again, to kind of spend some more time really with them and think a little bit more about them ahead of making any decisions about restoring the work. So I knew I was going to restore it, but at this point I was still kind of taking some time with these kind of pieces, and I ended up making these three photographic works based on these kind of assemblages of the sections. I'd have an ongoing kind of side interest in Louis Barragan's work, architecture, so I've just included one of his garden works from Mexico here as a context. My way of understanding these two pieces in particular were, in terms of thinking, what if they were a garden of some kind? So just to kind of give a little context to that. I think what I'm interested in kind of getting to here really is that the time between things has always been really important to me. It's very strange and interesting to be starting to talk about my practice again since my autism formal diagnosis in February. I'm 45 years old, and so many of the unanswered questions of my life I'm now finding I'm receiving answers to, understanding, and also re-evaluating my own narrative as I'd come to understand it over the decades of my life, really. So yeah, so that's a kind of open space for me right now, but it's very profound and an extraordinary time. So just wanted to flag up that I think I'd never watched what is the original trailer for Breton's A Man Escaped, and I was just hoping to put a little piece of it up now. How am I doing, Mark?
30, that's 13 minutes so far, Becky. Thank you.
Fabulous. So that's viewable, right?
No, I think you're just sharing the PowerPoint rather than your whole screen.
Yes, I know how to do that.
So
actually, you know what I'll do? I won't derail myself. I'll just stick with the screen I'm on. Yeah. So just to direct anyone who's interested to watch it, because it's a 3-minute trailer, and the first minute and a half is footage of and sound of soldiers, and a very sort of documentary style voice describing the context of war and the imprisonment of captured soldiers, and so very much a sort of documentary mode of description. And then just a moment before this shot here, the camera slides right, and then the second half of the trailer is just this wall, unmoving, and Mozart's Mass in C minor, which plays a very special role in the film, comes up. And so we sit for a minute and a half and listening to that very emotional piece of music and watching this wall. Yeah, it's quite I found that quite fascinating, and in the context of thinking about making a trailer for a film, I think it's probably fairly unique. Nina might disagree, but let's see. Yes, so the sort of subtitle is "The Wind Bloweth Where It Listeth," which I don't know so much about, but I've brought it up here for this context. Comes from John 3:8. So so the process of the film is the process of the protagonist preparing his escape. At the last minute, he realizes he needs an ally, that he can't do it alone, and so the young boy just becomes his collaborator. This is the very kind of end of the film, as they escape. Bresson titles the film in order to kind of relieve the kind of suspense of the end of the escape film, that we know before we begin that the man escaped, and that and so for me the time of the film becomes a very special process of observation, watching the hands working, and also I think the quietness of the film. There is some short moments of dialogue, but very little. And over the years, my mum and I have connected over some of her some books that she's sent me. The Desert Brothers and oh gosh, Mum, you're gonna kill me. A dozen books that she sent me over the years that have I've really enjoyed reading in the context of her own theological studies, our mutual love of etymology, roots, Latin plant names, gardening. And so for me, what was really interesting over the years of kind of coming to re-love the Easter time so profoundly, and spending some time reading and thinking about certain kind of themes, I guess, of interest to me. So I became very interested in an understanding of the Passion of Christ as a how I've kind of understood it as the course of events over a series of days, in the same as I or you might experience a series of events over a course of days. It's just that the passion is specific to Christ's passion and these particular series of days. And as somebody who's been very committed to my explorations of questions around the everyday in my practice from the get-go, this sort of understanding opened up a connection in terms of thinking, understanding, coming to this sort of point of understanding that of a series of events over a series of days, just a very special and very particular, and I think that bringing of these religious learning into the context of the everyday, and that the experience of I guess for me something like, I often said, like, well, tea or coffee, you know, in therein is the choice, and the sort of crossroads moments of as Blanchot describes beautifully, how the choice not made will sort of linger, and I'm interested in that, those sort of moments of kind of the moments of doubt, and in that sort of the moment of the decision. What is it to make a choice? I guess that's probably like another talk, really. But here specifically is in the etymology is to suffer, to happen in the passive sense, something that happens to. And that passive mode is something that I've been fascinated also. I did a lot of work around Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener, and that question around the passive voice and radical passivity, these types of projects that I've worked on. I'm sorry, Mark, I'm getting into full flow and I'm about to cut off. So, yeah, so this is, I guess, interested in this, in something that is happening to something or someone. This is one of the books that I've most enjoyed that my mum sent me, which again, as I reread this this blurb, it's so relevant to right now for experiences of illness, passivity, waiting. It's a fantastic book. So I'm not going to talk now, I'm just going to show some stills. And the film is the process of the repair. First, the box is glued and taped, then the lid is glued and taped, then the tape is removed from the box, the tape is removed from the lid, and we end. Yeah, so is that my time now, Mark?
Pardon?
Is that my time?
Yes, yes, that's gone slightly over. So thank you so much, Becky.
Oh my God,
much appreciated.
I kind of
I've returned your compliment of the definition with one I'm offering you one of my own there. Well, it's Wikipedia,
really?
not quite a dictionary, but
Yeah.
you mentioned the Desert Brothers a couple of times, and
yeah.
people might like to, if they're not already aware, to read a little bit about Desert Mothers.
Oh.
So please, as before with Ali, please put your comments and questions to Becky or around Becky, anything that's come up in your mind from reading, from hearing Becky. Thank you so much, Becky. That was really fascinating. I mean, this is the problem with the 20 minutes, because clearly we could have,
I know.
you know, it was just getting going, but it was wonderful. Thank you so much. And while I'm just waiting for people to put things in, give people the time, could I just pick up on you described the experience of, I guess, preparing for this and doing this presentation as a liberation. You used the word liberation, and that's really kind of heartwarming. I think that's what Nina and I really hope. I'm not sure we would have dared to use that term, but it's wonderful because I'm just speaking for myself here, a quick minute. I mean, as you know, I taught at Goldsmiths before I was ordained, but before that, I studied on the MA that James is on now, many years ago, and it actually coincided with me starting to develop a Christian faith, because I wasn't brought up religiously at all. And it was a strange time and place for that to happen. And I was in some ways quite naive about it all. And also the early 90s was, shall we say, less conducive to something like this, okay? And I was, in fact, the then head of the course, the MA course, Gerald Hemsworth, who passed away very recently, may he rest in peace. He said to me, if you carry on like this, you're going to fail. And I said, okay, so what should I do then? Right? What are the criteria? And he said, well, I think you should stop looking for answers and start looking at the quality of your questions. And I could have taken that to mean, in the sort of standard postmodern vernacular of the time, there are no answers, you know, meta-narratives, etc., etc. But I chose not to. I think I just knew that it was very good advice. It's very spot on for me, and it's never left me. And this forum is about quality of the questions. But you know, and it stood me in very good stead ever since. And of course, Gerald was a Catholic. I didn't know it at the time, but Gerald was a Catholic, so I was right not to take it as him. You know, I understood him, I heard him. So anyway, it's not easy to do, even though it may be easier these days, it's still not easy to do what you just did. So I personally just want to say thank you so much. And I'm going to read out some thanks from other people. David Vanacore, thank you for sharing, Becky. Abigail, thank you, Becky. So generous of you to share so much. Jorella, so thought-provoking. Totally loved your presentation. There you go. So once again, if Nina, very moving too. So sometimes, sorry, please go ahead.
I found this wonderful little quote from the Paul Schrader Transcendental Style of Film, which is a book I've loved for a long time. The films of Bresson exemplify the transcendental style in the West, but unlike Ozu, are estranged from their culture. I just thought there was something in there maybe for what was so pertinent about this forum that you guys are creating here.
Well, thank you. It's being created by us, and so thank you so much for being part of it. One more comment here. Anna's iPhone to everyone. Thank you very much. I'm really interested in your idea of the series of events over a series of days. So questions, of course, bubble up. And so if they come up to you during someone else's presentation, you can put them in the chat, just say for Becky. But we're now going to move on to, thank you again, Becky. We're going to move on to Geraldine, who, if I can just find my notes, Geraldine, this is continuing the Goldsmiths connection, actually, because Geraldine's an artist who trained at Goldsmiths as an art psychotherapist some time ago, and has a lot of experience of working as an art psychotherapist. So over to you, Geraldine. Thank you. And I will, once again, I will jump in and give you a heads up after 15 minutes, unless, like Becky, you asked before that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I want to just speak a little bit about sort of outsider feelings. I think certainly at Goldsmiths College, when we were training, we were thinking about outsider art and art produced by people with mental health problems, people in prisons, and a whole cross-section of people. I trained there in 1982, and it was just sort of forming. But I just wanted to start off with a quote from Dave Tomlinson, who brought out a book that was called How to Be a Bad Christian, which really appealed to me because it sort of gives permission. I think so much of religion has this sort of feel of perfection and so forth, and being a very good person. And I think one of the things that attracted me to becoming an art therapist was permission to sort of make mistakes and to very much be yourself in a session. So you're getting involved in a therapeutic relationship with someone, and if that's a safe enough place, you can slowly uncover things with the therapist and to work on issues and to allow yourself to explore things that are, you know, problematic or scary and this sort of thing. So it was a wonderful privilege. But with Dave Tomlinson, he advocates religion as a cure for the soul. And the soul is such an extraordinary thing to make sense of. It is what we have when we depart this world, to sort of make sense of quite what the soul means. But Dave Tomlinson believes in a loving God, not a punitive God. And I think so often there is that terrible fear that God is somehow this sort of man who's really rather unhappy all the time, or even punishing. And goodness knows what. My husband's a legal aid lawyer, and he won't become a Christian because he says that he's not going to pick up any more crumbs under the table. And of course, I tried to tell him that it's actually not about picking any more crumbs up, that God is actually giving you something, and that's what we have to try and understand. It's what we can receive from this person that's unseen, this sort of blind faith. So Dave Tomlinson has spent a lot of time releasing people from false guilt. And it's a wonderful thing to think that that role is being used by many people. God doesn't expect perfection from us, and there's no need to grovel in the way that my husband supposes he needs to do. It's about the cleansing and restoring love, and to make sense of that beautiful cleansing, restoring love is something that is really rather lovely. But we need to internalize that love. We have to give that time to that business, and to accept that it's something that you can, you know, receive. So for me, as I said earlier, I had very strong existential feelings. I felt very much the outsider, and I really didn't know what I was doing on this planet Earth. And I think being at boarding school in a very hostile environment where we studied divinity and so forth, it was a place that was very hostile. The girls didn't really want to be there. They weren't kind to each other unless they went into little cliques. And they certainly didn't want me, the new girl, turning up to sort of embrace into their life. So I shared a dormitory with girls who weren't kind. So I sort of developed what Leonard Woolf describes as a sort of carapace, an outer shell. So I'm very familiar with this defense mechanism that we all have in our lives. Anyway, I went on to study divinity at school, and we looked at the New Testament and so forth. I didn't, by the way, come from a Christian family. When I went up to Stoke-on-Trent to study a multidisciplinary design course, I'd obviously got this sense of something within me that whether it was sort of living with this man who caused me to think more in this way, I don't know, searching for answers. I then found myself going to the local church in this little hamlet in Shropshire. And it was pretty much just me and the vicar in these services, which was very sort of really sort of grabbed me. It was very interesting feelings, different feelings that would come again, as opposed to feelings that you have, you know, at art college and all the other things we do in life. So that was a nice thing to sort of make sense of and to explore more of. And then going into Stoke-on-Trent every day in my car, a 30-minute drive, and then staying up there for the summer to earn money in the summer holidays. I worked in what they called a pot bank, which is like a ceramic factory where we were making industrial ware. And that was a very interesting experience. And I got to know a young man who was also working there, and it sort of broke my heart really to find out about his plight, because for the first time I met somebody and got to know somebody quite well that was suffering with schizophrenia. So he had auditory hallucinations, and I couldn't really believe at this tender age of 18 that actually one's brain could be so afflicted by something so dreadful, and that one couldn't be in control of this. And it was a very, very terrifying and difficult realization to make sense of, and for him to be suffering in this way. I think that had quite an impact on me, but I felt I couldn't lose myself anymore in this friendship with this person. I found it really quite hard to take. So I was then sort of thinking a little bit about faith again at this college, and there was a scripture union, or a sort of, you know, Christian space where people could discuss things. And I wasn't really sure if it was so-called cool and whether it was something I wanted, but I was asking questions, and I was sort of getting to know people there who were vicars, and they were very friendly, and it was very encouraging to think that people were looking out for me, and I was sort of wondering whether to go down that path. So all that was going on, and the whole time I was trying to think about, you know, how much to invest in that. And I thought, well, if there's something in this Christianity, I need to have a sort of a epiphany. I need to have a sort of vision of God. I need to see something in my inner eye, or within my mind's eye. I needed to have a kind of a road to Damascus, because, you know, being a visual artist, it wasn't at the time I could see this, but I thought, well, if I don't get a picture of God in my mind's eye, then it can't be true. I can't go down that path. And I just couldn't think in any other way other than literally. So it was very hard for me to understand what I was thinking about, and to not get this. And I didn't understand that it was not, I couldn't sort of ask for what I wanted, and I didn't even discuss it with anybody. I just thought, well, I'm not getting it, so what on earth's going on? So anyway, I then went on to train at Goldsmiths College, and that was a very life-changing time. I had sort of I wasn't really going down the Christian path particularly by this time, and I was really getting to grips with learning more about myself in these amazing art psychotherapy groups, clinical seminars, and, you know, we were trying to engage in small groups and talk about how to engage with people and so forth. So it was a radical course, very life-changing, and I think it was an excellent opportunity for me. So I then went on to work with a cross different people in London, one-to-one, became a private practitioner, and so forth. And I think the longer I worked as an art therapist, the more I felt the weight of the issues that I was connecting with in different groups. I was working with different people, and it felt quite lonely in many ways. So I then found myself going to a local church in Greenwich, London Borough of Greenwich, which is a very active church. And it was full of these very functioning middle-class people who could ask to get their needs met. They were very public about their needs. And I was really struck by how they could ask for things that I wouldn't have dared to sort of ask for. So I was on this huge learning curve, and it was really useful for me. And it was nice to feel part of a group, and there were lots of lovely things going on there, like pilgrimages and cycling pilgrimages and walks to, you know, miles away and so forth. There were house groups, prayer groups. And so that was I was then able to encourage things within myself, which was very enriching. And especially at the time, I was trying to work as an artist, an art therapist, and a mother. And so there were lots of demands on me. And so that was really nice to feel that welcome from that place, and to learn, you know, so much from those experiences. So that's a little bit about me and my learning curve to do with the education within the art world. Whilst I was sort of having a chance to work on my own stuff, some of the art I produced was screen prints, which I then worked into. And I'd often use names in a kind of slightly poking fun way, but in a slightly serious way at the same time. And this is a screen print, which is called When in Rome. And it's, you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, because obviously they are pleasing themselves. And how much do they kowtow to, you know, kind of what the Christians were up to. So this is a little piece of work to do with that. Next screen, next. Now this one was painted when I went back home to my hometown in the West Country, and I had a difficult relationship with my mother, and it would be quite nice to take myself off and to sit in the confines of a church yard or a church garden and hold a painting as a way of focusing on an object and to, you know, to enjoy my creativity and to also give myself a very much needed space away from the difficult relationship that I sometimes felt with her. This is a more recent piece where I got some very nice interference paints, which I was playing with. And I was quite pleased with the way this particular painting went, using the interference paints in a way that I think expresses a slightly Christ-like, you know, cross-like feel. Last year I was given a commission to do, and the subject was love, and it was a person who wanted a very large painting on this subject, and it was during lockdown. I didn't have really much in the way of art materials and so forth, and I was playing very much with relationships and positions between people. I was looking at past life drawing classes and seeing which people were to hand that could be put together, and I used this man to begin with, the back of this man, and painted him in oils, only very limited colours, and it quite surprised me really to see what was emerging. And then this sort of figure that this female, very naive I wanted to be, and very innocent, sort of looking down, and it just became a sort of an Adam and Eve type painting. So that's not really something I usually do, but as I said, it emerged. So it was kind of exciting to think I was working the way I don't normally work in. So there was a big series of different pieces coming out on that commission. Again, trying to think in terms of working in a spiritual way is not something I tend to set out to do, but this painting sort of lent itself to thinking about the Virgin Mary in the forest. And although it's a bit bland, the image in some ways, just a kind of a stained glass window, it's supposed to be, of the Virgin Mary in the forest. It was just, again, an expression of bringing in a woman, and a very important woman at that, who had a bit of a extraordinary time being asked to carry a child without understanding quite what she's letting herself in for. And going back to the series on the Love Commission, this lots of different images, but this particular image here was one of a man with his hand outstretched and a woman sort of looking on, sort of available, but he's kind of very much beckoning her with one arm to say, you know, come to me, or receive, type of thing. And it's very much to do with this gentility of love that is something that we can access from Christ, should we sort of knock on the door and find out more for ourselves. So I was quite pleased to think that I sort of hit upon this gentle image of a sort of love connection between two figures, particularly as I couldn't, during the pandemic, sort of get any models in to draw. So the whole series was lots of different images around love, and how we understand that. So yeah, and then the very first one, halcyon days, you can almost see this sort of vestigial figure, top right hand side of the sort of male figure really lurking. I was delighted with this painting. It's very large, it's about 4 foot by 5 foot. And I think to use yellow in the way that I have, I've been so pleased with this because, you know, one of the very arduous things about painting is how we sort of get very cross with things and beat ourselves up a bit. And often things are destroyed in order then to be created again. So it's very much about how paint is manipulated. And I felt that this was successful. So I felt a sense of triumph with this piece of work. So there is that sort of sense of the atmosphere in the painting with the way the paint is distributed, and that there's just a sort of a sense of a figure there, and you know, a feeling of the light and the atmosphere. And then finally this painting here, quite often I'll go into my studio to work with not always a clear idea of what I'm doing, and this particular piece I was delighted with because this sort of seascape came about through this window, and quite often in my work I find I've got these vistas that where you're sort of looking through into a dream landscape, or in this case a seascape. And I felt you know, this delight, because it was almost as though this sort of hand of God, or this wonderful flow, would sort of come to sort of me, as opposed to me willing it, of its own accord would sort of come to me, and then it would be presenting itself in front of me. And so there's that wonderful connection and delight with something happening that you hadn't purposed, but it's there as a sort of an offering. So I'm not quite sure how many minutes I've had, Mark.
Oops, that's just coming up to 19 minutes there, Geraldine. So that's good timing. If you want to, were you asking for a time check, or were you?
I was asking for a time check.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'd been going to. I was going to say at the 15, but then you'd said it sounded like you were reaching the end, so I thought I wouldn't interrupt you.
Oh,
but,
okay. Yes, yeah. Lovely. Yes. So yeah, really, I just wanted to talk about promise, because I think promise and hope, you know, when your senses are engaged, and certainly in thinking in terms of this mystical figure Jesus, and then we think about the stories that we've read in the Bible, those extraordinary stories. It's quite an extraordinary message to kind of comprehend and to be working with. And thank you very much, everybody, for listening to me, and hope that you managed to get something from it. And as I say, the delight of being able to use art materials to express myself, and especially I think in terms of making sense of the spiritual side, is something that you know, involves me while I'm living on planet Earth. So that's that, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you very much. It's really particularly fascinating for me to hear you talk about, you know, from a psychotherapeutic perspective, and not just art, but the church. I was really struck, actually. I mean, I learned something. It's never, when you talked about, you know, a type of Christianity that is very comfortable with asking for what one wants or needs, and how not everybody is like that, and without trying to anyway, I identified with the other way of not being able to do that. So that was very interesting. And also, just to, while people are putting, once again, while people are putting, please put in your comments and questions. But while you're doing that, just allow me to reflect, really, that I'd mentioned after Becky's talk that I'd been at Goldsmiths in the early 90s, and you know, and I said it was almost impossible to talk about faith, really, but it was almost de rigueur to talk about not so much psychotherapy, but psychoanalysis. Okay, and so it's curious, you know, there's a sort of that you're able to combine it. But I think one of the reasons for that is that you know, psychoanalysis was always talked about in the abstract or in a theory in relation to other people, you know, in relation to other subjects rather than oneself, really. As I recall it, anyway. I know that's not always the case. It wasn't always the case in the theory. I mean, feminist theory was very personal, but in practice, it tended to be kind of a bit abstract. And you know, one of the key things about this forum, Nina and I have said from the get-go, you know, we didn't really want to focus on a sociological or anthropological perspective, but to actually on a basis of practice, you know, art practice, faith practice, and you've now introduced psychotherapeutic practice. So thank you so much for that. Some comments here. Nina, did you receive or experience the Damascene moment you were wanting? Alastair Gordon, thank you, Geraldine. I especially enjoyed the painting of the woman approaching Christ. It seemed also to touch on questions around how paint is manipulated and how paintings are constructed, with a question mark there. So that's a question, remembering that you'll have an opportunity to address these at the end. Geraldine, in your work, did you feel you have been led by colour? There we are, there's a yes already. Anna's iPhone to everyone. I love the sense of the joy of your faith in your work. You are. So yes, so thank you again, Geraldine, and it was lovely to see all the sun shining, if I may just say, it's shining on your face. It was like as glowing as your paintings. It was very nice to see. Yes, once again, feel free to put any more comments or questions in as we proceed, but we're now going to move on to our final presenter for the evening, Sarah White. Sarah is an interdisciplinary artist who studied at Chelsea College of Arts and has also, as I mentioned at the beginning, she's been involved with Morphē as an artist mentor for the past 8 years. So Sarah is going to talk about her practice now. Thank you. Over to you, Sarah. Thank you. And thank you again, Geraldine.
Yeah, thank you. Just going to share screen. Hopefully you can see this. So I'm going to present some research that I've been doing over the last few months whilst I've been on sabbatical. What I'll talk about is the first part of some writing that I did at the end of my sabbatical. In the background, you're going to see some footage from a performance that I did in September with the artist Nikolai Azariah, who I think is here, filmmaker. He's on the MA at Goldsmiths, and Tyrone Isaac Stewart, who is a dancer and musician. So the work was made collaboratively, and me kind of putting it alongside my own research. It's not kind of the original situation of this work, but they very graciously allowed me to share it in this context. In my practice over the past years, I have been compelled by images of the falling body and meditating on the metaphor "I'm feeling down," which applies a physical orientation of the body to an emotional state of sadness. In my movement practice, I work with the upside down body, witnessed in moments of falling or at the edge of doing so, in states of tipping and suspense, in particular with reference to the entombment paintings of Christ being lowered down from the cross, where Jesus's pale graying corpse falls, curving upside down and collapsing into the arms of the disciples who bow under its weight. In the tradition of judgment paintings, the body is also witnessed en masse inverted and dropping down into Hades. The inverted orientation of the body in an upside down state was mobilized into the act of falling, and the moment of falling took on its own metaphorical life as an analogy of death. Then a few years ago, I read T.J. Clarke's Heaven on Earth, and he rotated the body for me, turning it from down to up, as he developed an ontology of uprightness through the paintings of Giotto, Poussin, Bruegel, and Veronese. Clarke draws out the orientation of the human body in its upright or downfallen state as a possible foundation for understanding our very being in the world. Before going too far, it is important to say that in discussing human uprightness, I am conscious to not unhelpfully reaffirm the anthropocentric theorizing, which has dominated Western philosophy at the expense of the rest of the creation, positing a distinguished uprightness of man as a totalizing image, which assumes our authority and implies certain bodily norms. Uprightness as an analogy has been extrapolated to have problematic totalizing ethical and moral implications. There are limits to images and metaphors. Clarke wrestles with the dialectic of up and down, of above and below, exploring the implications of our bipedalism and how it has been established pictorially and theoretically as a pivot point for comprehending the relationship between human and divine. Much of this dialectic is established within a medieval metaphysics, which pursued binaries of spiritual and material, where each is attracted to its respective gravitational pole, the spiritual upward and the material downward. As such, one is now inclined to resist using language of above and below due to the dismantling of this hierarchical binary. In a 1960s Bible dictionary entry for the word ascension, the commentator tries to reduce or explain away the described upward direction of Christ's movement post-resurrection, to avoid affirming the notion that the heavenly realm is above us in the sky. However, despite all this, Scripture still articulates a significant integrity to the imagery of spatial axes and movement across them. Although not totalizing, there is a poetic unity to these images. Biblical language grounds our thinking and imagining within the body through the persistent use of orientational metaphors. What we see is a deep poetic connection with the human groundedness in and awareness of our relation to the whole of creation. I'm thinking here of the spatial emotional language of above and below, up and down, high and low, ascent and descent, left and right, rise and fall, standing and lying. In Heaven on Earth, T.J. Clarke allows the fact of our bipedalism to become a primary interpretive lens, but without landing on any specific ethical, spiritual, or ideological imperative. He sees in the paintings a unique fascination with the groundedness of the body and the inherent upwardness of our orientation, as bipedal creatures who stand with their feet on the ground and their head looking up. For these painters, the contact of the body with the ground and the actual physiology of 3 dimensions become their 2 great subjects. In color, composition, and structure, the ground is given an equal and opposite weight to the world constructed on top of it. For Clarke, bipedalism becomes a state which inflects and informs the whole texture of human doings, which presupposes all actions and aspirations, and from which has derived so much of human nature and culture. Clarke emphasizes the profound understanding Christianity brings to this notion. To quote, "Bipedalism may be the fact of our physical nature that speaks best to our having been made in the image of God. Certainly, our culture goes on thinking of failure or error as a version of the fall." This uprightness is not a given or a fixity. Particularly in Bruegel's paintings, the complexity and instability of this contact with the ground is set in motion. The ground concurrently limits, threatens, and enables all our human action. And of course, surely it matters profoundly that we end our days lying down, horizontal, no longer upright. Clarke's thesis sees in the depictions of the heavens or the afterlife a spirituality which is grounded in and subject to the materiality of the now, of the earthly. Above is understood in terms of the below, or above is below. the grounding of these depictions of heaven in the materiality of earth is, it seems to me, an inevitability, not a surprise. And not because there is no heaven, but because all that we imagine is contained within the boundaries of what we know, or what was already on the periphery of our knowledge, or what is latent in the subconscious, or that which arises from and is subject to the conditions of possibility of what already is. This does not mean we are not able to spend time imagining somewhere other, but that imagining will always be contained within boundaries, or will always refer in some way to the things that are. All possibilities which open up seem to be limited in some way by that which they are grounded in and founded upon. The heavenly depictions Clarke analyzes give the spiritual realm a heavy materiality, pertaining more truly to a biblical understanding of the physicality of the afterlife than has at other times been implied. These painters don't just depict heaven or the afterlife. They also try to represent the encounter or interval between the two and the different or similar ontologies of each realm. Orientational and bodily metaphors are applied continually across scripture to human life, death, and morality, to Yahweh's actions and character, to the behavior and fate of the land, and to the interactions between all these entities. The literature is permeated by analogous imagery of the movement of the body standing on or off balance, rising or falling. Bipedalism becomes a metaphorical pivot point, and trajectories away from this upright orientation take on their own significance. The body is witnessed falling, staggering, stumbling, slipping, groping, lying down, face down, going down, and being brought low, or upright, rising, standing up, and going up. The metaphors don't just apply to the body's movement on a vertical plane, but also horizontally through space. It moves backwards and forwards along straight paths or down side roads, on highways which are raised up. The levelness of the ground contributes to this stability and movement. And at times the earth completely gives way, opening up and swallowing people down into it. Uprightness in Hebraic language seems to pertain to moral righteousness and correlates to standing on level ground and walking along straight paths. The Hebrew word Jeshuran means upright one, and is the poetic name for Israel, designating it under its ideal character. The language in the Old Testament is not just orientational, but also bodily. In Hebrew, virtually all propositions are metaphorical, and almost all have to do with body parts. These are particularly intriguing as they pertain to descriptors of Yahweh. He is ascribed, amongst other features, a mouth, fingers, hands, and eyes, which roam to and fro across the earth. Yet also people see no form pertaining to him. These images are both given and withdrawn, preventing any pretense of conceptually grasping the mystery of God. Although we must still contend with the imprinted mental image of human features assigned to God, which influence our perception of him. This bodily language pertains not only to Yahweh, but also to creation itself. From the outset in Genesis 1, in the beginning is Reshif in Hebrew, which comes from the root word rosh, meaning head. Creation can be thought of as birthed head first. The land or the earth is a surface which keeps the body upright, upon which the feet rest. The land experiences similar movement to the body, subject also to motional language of up and down, contraction and enlargement. It expands, grows up and spreads out, or is laid waste and brought low. The high places become not just a location, but a type, and mountains take on their own significance as to a particular space of encounter with God. With the land's expansion, there also comes a sense of the breadth and fullness of God's presence. The eyes of the Lord run to and fro across the earth. Here God both travels through and fills up the earth. Incidentally, this is the same expression used of Satan in Job. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And he answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." Fullness and presence is expressed through reference to every corner of the earth and heavens, from every point of the compass, from every high hill and under every tree. Up and down, backward and forward. God's Spirit descends on people and places. People fall down before the Lord. God raises up kings and prophets. A stairway rests on the earth, its top reaching to heaven, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Manna falls from the sky and people look up to the heavens. The focus on our bodily orientation highlights the limits and capacities of our body, the profound difference between us and God, the gap or interval in between. Rooted in tensions of how we experience God, the question became for me, how does the orientation of the human body and its movement in space act as a reference point for articulating what kind of encounter we can or cannot have with God, and of where we are, morally, spiritually, physically, before God and in relation to the world? As I consider encounter with one utterly beyond me, how do I conceive of and give language to the nature of God through the terms of my own embodiment? How does Scripture enact this? And how does the incarnation perform this tension, bringing together ontologically incompatible natures in the person of Christ? To the human body has been ascribed the capacity to engage in this encounter with the divine by the very means of the upward orientation of our body. In an essay, Jesus Christ, the Divine Animal, Brian Brock recites the following quote: "And whereas other animals bend their looks downwards upon the earth, to man he gave a countenance to look on high, and to behold the heavens, and to raise his face erect to the stars." This orientation is implied to be the condition of possibility of our encounter with God. Brock critiques this history of philosophy, which has distinguished man as animal from the rest of the created existence. He traces this quote back to the church father Lactantius in his Divine Institutes, but Lactantius was in fact quoting from the creation myth in Ovid's Metamorphosis in 8 AD. For Ovid, our bipedalism becomes one of the starting points for articulating what kind of encounter or interaction we as humans can have with God. It becomes one of the means by which this encounter is enabled or announced. And it seems to be dependent upon the idea that God is in some way located spatially above our heads.
Sarah, just to let you know, that's the 15-minute mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Once I've established my own orientation, the question remains, what is the location and orientation of the one I'm encountering? In attempting a doctrine of God, Gregory of Nyssa asks, is God located in space or not? If the deity is located above the universe, what is the dividing line between it and the universe? Where is the higher place? How are higher and lower levels to be recognized when there is no dividing line to separate them? The body in Scripture acts metaphorically, not just for our orientation towards God, but also to articulate God's orientation towards us. In Jeremiah 18:17, we hear God say, "I will show them my back, not my face." Here, back concerns the nape of the neck and is used in instances to speak of stiff-necked people who rebel against the Lord. Face is panim, the same word used in Genesis 1 to describe the spirit hovering over the face of the deep. Implied in this question of encounter is also that of absence. How is the absence of another measured in relation to its distance from my own body? And what measurement of distance constitutes intimacy or separation? What is the boundary point between the two? The distance from God can sometimes feel like a profound chasm, to which questions are pronounced, but without knowing in which trajectory spatially to project them. Working with our own embodiment, how do we comprehend the possibility of encounter with God, physically, spatially, linguistically, and temporally, and as subject to these conditions? Where are we in relation to God, and where is he in relation to us? How have our physical orientation and our physical features been a starting point for articulating the nature or possibility of this encounter? If this is a question of encounter, then the correlating question is, what is the nature of the one we are encountering? What is the orientation of God? And how, as Athanasius articulates, does the incarnation radically alter the order of being? Before the incarnation, divine and human were ontologically incompatible categories, but in the body of Christ, they are somehow brought together. In his state of questioning and lament, Job articulates how God feels both too near and too far. God is sent so near and constant in his presence that Job cannot even be alone with his spit. But equally, God is felt so far away and fleeting that he cannot be perceived. To focus on the orientation of the human body is also to consider what is around, beside, beneath, and above us. It is our environment which determines and contextualizes our upright orientation. Uprightness is correlative to what we stand upon, the ground, and what we look up to, the sky. This language positions us as a physical being in a space far greater than ourselves and as dependent creatures. We are both centered and decentered, and we are established amongst the movement and orientation of the whole of creation, with God as the pivot point, not us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Beautifully timed. Once again, please put your comments and questions into the chat. And while you're doing that, I will just say thank you again, Sarah. I mean, what a thoughtful presentation. In fact, we've had 4 very thoughtful presentations tonight, and but with thoughts expressed in quite all rooted in practice, but expressed in quite different ways, quite diverse ways, and and I'm very grateful for that. One thing I did think is I might need to speak to quickly is the fact that amidst that diversity, all of the presentations took a Christian, or perhaps in your case, Sarah, Judeo-Christian perspective. And I should say other religions are available, and more to the point, are acceptable in this forum. The forum grew out of the symposium that Nina developed last year, and that grew out of her and some of her students' specific research interests. So maybe that kind of guided the sort of the audience kind of demographic, should we say. And this forum, because it grew out of that, probably reflects that. But it's, I just like to say it's important that we are, we would like people to speak about what their own faith practice, whatever that might be. So please do bear that in mind, and also pass that on to other people who you think you might like to hear. Thank you very much. So fantastic. Again, this is from Urella. Fantastic. Again, so much to think about, and love the film and the space in which it was filmed. Alexa, wow, so beautiful. Thank you. David, thank you. Vanikor, thank you, Sarah. Very deep. Alastair, beautiful presentation, Sarah. Thank you. I wonder how your recent research might inform your performance practice. there's a comment from you, just the credit to Nikolai Azariah and Tyrone Isaac Stewart. Walter Hernandez, quite beautiful, Sarah, exclamation mark. And Nina, thank you for 4 wonderful presentations, which I think is a good point to open this up now. I think it'd probably be fair enough to go in the order we took. So Ali, if you would like to pick one of the questions that have been put to you and maybe speak to it. We have actually, we really don't have a huge amount of time. We've got 15 minutes. So if between the 4 of you, you could bear that in mind. Let's proceed ASAP. So Ali, is there, just, you've had a chance to think, is there something you'd like to speak to?
In some ways, I maybe have the advantage. I've had the longest to reflect and mull. Thanks everybody for all those questions. I think I was asked 3 questions, so I'll just choose one. Maybe just quickly at first, Mark, thank you for that comment about the root word for religion and ligament. I did a little Google search, I must admit, and yes, I think they are indeed related. It's all from religio in the Latin, which is to bind and to bond. And I hadn't specifically made a connection to masking tape with that. Masking tape to me, and of course, if you're new to my work, then you might be forgiven for thinking that you're looking at masking tape and bits of paper stuck onto wood, but it's a highly illusionistic approach to painting, to give the illusion of stuff stuck onto wooden boards. But to me, they function more as a device to explore certain questions about painting, actually about how paintings function and how paintings are constructed. And I've never met a painter who doesn't have rolls of masking tape in their studio. It seems to sort of crop its way into painting circles. And to that effect, painting to me is a deeply theological enterprise. So it does come back to questions of faith, I think, and belief. But I think painting does. At the moment you pick up a brush, you're connecting with questions about matter and materiality and meaning just by sloshing stuff across the surface. Erica asked whether these paintings have changed in the last year, whether my practice has changed, and it related to William's question about how is that when I go through dry spells in a spiritual life, so to speak, how does that affect your work? Well, yes, my practice has changed massively in the last year. I think for many artists in lockdown, it has. At the start of the year, when exhibitions were cancelled and postponed, I found myself in that situation where there's a bit of a financial worry. My paintings do help pay the rent. And when that wasn't happening, I was, pretty concerned about the year ahead. But also there was this kind of nice opportunity to make work without the expectation to exhibit. And I asked myself, what would one make if I knew I didn't have a show for a year? And one of the galleries who show my work, Aleph Contemporary, were very supportive of this idea of kind of deconstructing my practice. And I think it probably takes a full year to deconstruct a practice, if not more. And I still feel like I'm building it again. So in a way, a forum like this is so good because it gives you an opportunity to showcase ideas and practices that you don't feel are ready for exhibition. And I don't think any of the work I've presented tonight for my sketchbooks really is ready for exhibition. But the practice has become more intuitive and it's become more responsive to a prayer life as a form of liturgy, as I was sort of alluding to in my work and my presentation. And one key factor of that is that the beginning of the day begins with prayer. And rather than expecting what I'll make on day to day, to work more intuitively to what seems to be right on that day. Mark kindly mentioned my most recent painting where I'm making an illusion of masking tape and paper painted onto a wooden substrate. That takes a lot of time and lots of slow painting. But then of a morning of a studio day, I take that constructed illusionistic painting into the landscape, actually to Wimbledon Common, near where I live, and then paint intuitively from the landscape, you know, and Wimbledon Common is a very pastoral landscape. So it connects with all kinds of interesting ideas about how we attend to creation or to nature. You know, there's a deep theological question around the pastoral landscape. So in effect, it's like painting backwards, where in the past, artists like Cézanne, Van Gogh, Gauguin might begin in the landscape, bring it back to the studio and complete. I begin in the studio and then finish it in the landscape, responding intuitively to what I see. So the whole thing's a bit of a jolly adventure into landscape painting and trying to explore a theological framework for that. So it is new. It feels nervy even to talk about it and do it, but I'm quite glad for the opportunity to do that this year.
Thank you, Ali. That was a very nice summation of the questions. I think you've done this before. Thank you. Becky, please don't feel that you have to cover everything, but if you can, please do respond to, in whatever way you'd like to the comments and questions that were put to you. Thank you.
I found some comments from Jorella Andrews. I don't know if they're still here. Just comments on the stuff to do with language and etymology, and there's different senses of time, and also Bresson's strategy of using a title to remove the tension that would normally drive an escape film is quite something, almost like destroying a genre, but then a totally different experience of noticing can open up, including the craft of breaking out or breaking into something else. So yeah, there's lots of things in there, kind of got my brain kind of going. But I think just to go back to, I put a little note up earlier about the Paul Schrader transcendental style of film. There's a little bit here where this is Schrader writing, Bresson's use of the everyday is not derived from a concern for real life, but from an opposition to the contrived dramatic events which pass for real life in movies. And it got me thinking about my sort of early relationship with photography, and a feeling that there was, if you took away kind of everything given that came with, say, a glossy colour photograph, what would remain? If you were kind of deprived it of lots of the things that it would give to you anyway, in a certain sort of very generalized kind of way of thinking about these things, what would remain? And certainly for me, that those were kind of core, that kind of bare, pared back sort of way of thinking about medium, in which I got very philosophically, intellectually, and sort of practically involved. And it that sort of led me to like thinking about the backside of photographic prints as this kind of bare, quiet, kind of private space in relation to the kind of photographic object, and then translated those types of thoughts into thinking about how that space could be opened up sculpturally. So it's a sort of slightly off-piste description of kind of reference to that, to the Bresson, yeah, kind of, and I think there's something in that kind of this sort of paired backness of things, and Bresson's very specific ideas around acting and being, and this idea of he saw these contrived sort of dramatic events which pass for real life in movies as emotional constructs, plot, acting, camera work, editing, music. He saw them as screens. There are too many things that interpose themselves. There are screens. Screens prevent the viewer from seeing through the surface reality to the supernatural. They suppose that the external reality is self-sufficient. And yeah, I guess there's sort of something in there that people described his films as cold and dull. Great colder and duller the better, please. Yeah, which isn't my experience of them, but yeah. Is Jarella there? Is she still there? Or
Yeah, she's just put a comment in. Thanks, Becky. I'll need to read those books. So there you go.
yeah, and also I just picked out, I'm sure Mum's gone to sleep, but this is one of the first books Mum gave me, which I so loved. So if you're interested in, when I was talking about the kind of just the way I wanted to work with the wood at the beginning, and really came from reading William Barclay on use of the word poor in spirit, and really going back into sort of like kind of real the kind of histories of the sorry, I'm not being very articulate now, I'm slightly derailing this time of night, my brain's frazzling, but yeah, the sort of histories of where we come to the sort of to the Beatitudes, and the sort of like much more expansive sense of understanding of what they can do for us. And then this is my beloved Desert Brothers book. I found the Wikipedia page. Thanks for that, Mark. Terrific. I hadn't come across the mothers, so I'll as I am one now, I'll check them out.
Thank you, Becky. Thanks so much. Oh, Geraldine, I was just about to say you disappeared, so we're going to move on to Sarah, but you're back.
Standing up and listening.
Okay.
Yeah, the first thing, I think Nina was asking about the Damascene moment, which I was sort of very insistent on. I think it was the time where I was really sort of crying out to God for that witness, if you like, with the visual, which wasn't forthcoming. And there was that sort of sense of mortification. You know, I wasn't getting what I wanted, and I was sort of, you know, crying out for that. And so there was that feeling of, well, it's all a load of balderdash, then how can I believe in something? And of course, it was only later I could understand that, you know, it's this blind faith that we can't see. We can't always we can ask for things, but we can't get what we want a lot of the time. We have to cope with the fact that it's as and when, and it's not my will, it's thy will. And so that helped me to continue believing, because I couldn't decide what I could have when I wanted it, if that makes sense. So that was that, really. But that was such an interesting business, isn't it, really, thinking and so forth. And then colour, I've always absolutely delighted in colour. I mean, it is the sort of first thing, I suppose, that I will, you know, think of. I mean, when we were in Albury Street in Deptford, which is where the Goldsmiths campus was then, we would go down into the basement and have all these tubes of colour and paper. And we had to go into a room for an hour and a half with a psychotherapist in there who was not, you know, obviously involving himself, it was a male in this case, with the art activity. We could do what we wanted, when we wanted, for an hour and a half, but we couldn't leave the room. And this was absolute seventh heaven to me, to be able to just, you know, to go for a colour, squirt it out, or paint something down, or do whatever. And I just was always wanting to get what I called the ball rolling, but that wasn't the kind of stance that a lot of the other people in the room wanted to make. They might feel totally inactive and not want to sort of rush into anything, but I just had this huge desire to use colour and enjoy colour, and to, you know, I just got stuck in. It was just, you know, it was just wonderful freedom for me, lack of control, just being open to creativity, you know. So that's the second question. And I think the third question was from somebody talking about the last painting, the image that I did of this sort of Jesus-like character reaching a hand out to the woman in front of him. And I was working quite a lot with figures and positions, and they were all communicating a different sort of love. Some love that was lust, some love that was just object driven, you know, the Adam and Eve you know, couple, and all the different variations thereof. But when I got to this you know, the one where Christ is offering his hand. And there were lots of different images I did of that particular piece. I was sort of working in a pointillist way. I had a Eckhart Tolle talking the whole day, really anchoring me in the moment. And I was really bouncing a brush with paint in a way that I don't tend to work. And I was happily losing myself in that experience. And I didn't have to worry about the outcome, because I so often say to myself, don't worry about the outcome. There's no right way of doing it. Don't judge it. And all the things as art therapists we've always said over the years. So it was, the brush was bouncing away as I was listening to Eckhart Tolle and as I was executing this piece of work, which was the final piece that was chosen by the woman who commissioned me, I'm pleased to say. So yeah, all these different pieces of work that I worked on ended up, you know, with that great opportunity for me to think on about that great subject of love, you know, unconditional love, and love that also has conditions and everything therein. So that's that.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. It's my duty to inform you it's 8 p.m. I've clearly failed in my task of managing the time. So please forgive me, and with your permission, I'm going to extend this session just for a few minutes so we can hear Sarah, and also so I can just read out a couple more comments that have come in subsequently. One from Tola. Bless you, Sarah, for a reflection that forces us to challenge the very notions on which we conceive God and our interaction with the divine. I particularly liked the questions around distance and intimacy, or lack thereof, and the difficulty of determining where one starts and ends. I also appreciate how you tacitly acknowledge the limit of metaphor. That should humble us in our perceptions of God. And Mimi Whiteway has said, actually this is a comment to everybody, thanks everyone, been so lovely to hear such broad and personal perspectives of art making and faith. Oh, actually, sorry, this is a question for Sarah. I love how much you focused on the body as metaphor and in action through space. I'm wondering what your thoughts were on the body as material, theologically speaking. I'm specifically thinking about performance artwork that might blur the lines between object, subject, and questions of ownership and will. Well, two very thoughtful questions at the end, which you probably don't have time to go into fully now, Sarah, but maybe this is an opportunity just to ask all four of you. You've all got your websites on our website. Are you happy for people to get in touch with you if they would like to ask you further questions? Yes, excellent. Thank you so much. So please do that. But now, Sarah, if you would like to respond as you wish to the comments that you've received tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. So the imagery, the footage that you saw, as I said, was filmed by Nikolai, and the movement was by Tyrone, but it was a collaborative project. And I think also partly in response to Ali's question about how this connects to my performance practice, these questions of encounter and interaction became pertinent when you're collaborating in a space with free people who are bringing all of their practices into the space, and we tried to kind of hold the space together, and had to ask a lot of questions about how you encounter one another's practice and maybe interrupt it, or disagree with it, or dismantle it, or just sit beside it. And I think in relation to Mimi's questions did come up, and maybe particularly for Tyrone and for some of us, about how the dancer's body is objectified or has been objectified, and what questions there are about agency and will in the dancer's body. So that was definitely in the forefront of our mind when we were performing and collaborating. And yeah, that's a huge question in terms of prophets. Like, I guess as Ali mentioned, like some of the prophets in the Old Testament, and who has the agency in the things that are happening to their bodies or that they're doing to their body. So yeah, it's a really important question. But for me, it became very much about collaborative practice and was worked out in those interactions in the three of us in the space together. Yeah, I'll leave it there because of time.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, all of you, for 4 wonderful presentations. Actually, each one of you, I think, could have taken up all our time tonight. So thank you so much for being so concise. We've got some more comments coming in. Thank you to all the presenters this evening, such rich, thought-provoking insights and experiences. Thank you, everyone. Wonderful evening, brilliant evening. Thank you. I'm sure we'll get more comments coming in, but I'd just like to thank everybody for coming. It's such a joy to be able to gather together like this, and perhaps one day in person. But in the meantime, we will be here next month. Nina will be in the hot seat, so to speak. And we will let you know who our wonderful presenters will be. We have all your email addresses. We will get in touch with you until you ask us to stop. And so we will look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye.